Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of A Valiant Endeavor. Tonight, we will be discussing the World of Nareus and discussing the first of several stories. The first one is called The Chronicles of the Southern Coalition. But before we get into that, I want to discuss a few things and give a few shout-outs to especially one individual named Mage Hammer. He inspired me to start doing some solo run-throughs of using RPG settings and coming up with your own ideas and stuff. And so I did that, and I'm excited to try this out. First off, we'll be using a game system called Castles and Crusades, if you can see it here. This is the player's handbook. This is the newest edition, and we'll be using that as our basis for the role-playing session and rules and stuff. And so we'll be coming through, and I will discuss some of that as we play through, but I'm not going to get into the details of that. But I do have a few house rules that I'll be using, and I'll put these out here so you can see. Basically, a few things, just the attributes are not, we do 46, drop the lowest, and distribute as you like. We will use method 3 from the Castle Keeper's Guide. I'm using a special rule that I've kind of came up with. They have a mana rule set in the Castle Keeper's Guide, but I actually like mine a little bit. It's a little easier to follow, and basically, 0 level spells you can cast as much as you want within reason. They do tire the caster out after a while, but generally the 0 level spells are not very powerful. And then you get mana points based upon how many spells per level you can cast. So my example here says that a first level wizard with 1 bonus spell would have 1 times 2 plus 1 slot, so each will 3 mana points to use during the day before resting. And basically, to cast a spell, it takes 1 mana per level to cast a spell. And we'll get into some of that later. Wizards still have to have spells in their spell book. Clerics generally just have the list available to them. So it's going to be a little free form, but I actually like doing it this way, and you'll see some of that, how it works as we get into a gameplay. We start with maximum hit points for all the characters. I'll introduce the characters in a few. Hit points heal at a specific rate, and we'll get into that later. And when they start having some damage caused to them, I do like the critical hit miss option that we're going to be using. So max damage, if critical hit, max damage of the weapon plus a d4 plus any other modifiers. And death will be done at -10 for dying unless they have a constitution which is greater than 10, which will use the constitution score. A negative constitution score for whether they're dying or not. But we will use the -7 rules and all that stuff for some of the abilities, some of the negativity that comes being at really low negative hit points. Another thing is you can make a full move and make an attack during a round of action. You can also split up your movement as you do actions. And a caster can move up to half its a move and then cast a spell, but they must make a concentration check, which would be versus intelligence. I'll also allow it versus wisdom if it's a cleric. Depends on the main primary attribute. And I will allow multiclassing. I do have a multiclass character, but it has to have a good storyline element and reasons why it would be that way. So that is my house rules very quickly. And a quick background of the world. As you see in the map, this is the small section that we'll be adventuring in originally. This is a small segment of the World of Nareus. This area here, the Capicia and Casia and a couple other smaller groups are called the Southern Coalition. 37 years ago, a necromancer named Dolgur was coming from the north, and he was obliterating every army and every nation as he came south. And the survivors were coming south if they could, but his destruction of the land was basically obliterating. And the land, as you can see, some of the brown and tan, that's actually where the line was drawn during the fight. The southern countries here and regions joined together in a group called the Southern Coalition, along with survivors from the attacks up north, and they fought a brave battle, and they just stopped, and Dolgur was destroyed, and it stopped his armies. And when he just was destroyed, his armies basically fell apart or dissipated and lost the will to fight. A lot of them still exist up in the north and even sometimes in the south. But many heroes and many famous people of that time were killed or sacrificed during the fight because they were trying to stop this menace that would have destroyed and obliterated the world as they knew it. After 37 years, this will start 37 years past that point of time, and this area up here is called the ravaging line. The nations have joined together, maintaining a coalition, and they send up patrols continuously to monitor the regions that are up there, because there are still powerful entities and forces that are still around that do come south, and they actually they're rampaging up north too. And there are riches and stuff that people can go up and find, and there are ruins available to go search, but it's still a dangerous time to go up there. Most people do not do that. They stay south, and they try to survive that way. It is still, even with the coalition and all the danger that is happening within the world, it is still a very loose coalition, and there are sometimes small little wars started between the two regions, taking advantage of the chaos that is up north. And they still report sightings from of creatures and things coming south. There are rumors of underground excursions, specific humanoids and creatures that are powerful at digging are coming south, using maybe even stuff that they can't be, they're hidden. There are rumors of that up north. And so that is what is happening. And that is the current state of the world as we know it. So, since many heroes and many powerful characters were killed or lost during the fight, this is a time for heroes. This is a time for when there's a call that we need people that will stand up and protect and help lead these beleaguered nations and coalition into the future, and hopefully that they can start reclaiming the North and reclaiming the things that have they've lost. So the three characters that we're starting with all have a little bit of background history. The first one is, I'll put her name here, is Alindra Lorelei, and I'll be using this. I don't use the miniatures. I won't be using miniatures in the sense of on the tabletop for game, but I'll use them as a placeholder for you to see what's going on and stuff. But this is the character I'm using for her. She is a thief wizard, and everyone starts off at first level. I'm also using a pantheon that I've developed. So she worships Talare, and we'll get into some of that later as we get into more depth of playing. But she actually came from a city called, way up north, an elven city called Illustrium. It was one of the first elven cities to be destroyed by Dulgur's army. It was quickly overrun due to lack of any warning that they had. Alindra's father had strong business connections in the port city of Ar, which is right here. It's one of the major port cities that still survives. And he used his connections to get him and his family out of Illustrium. They actually escaped the city, but they needed a way to get to the south, and they used that along with some other family members and friends. They made it to Ar. Unfortunately, her father's associates at Ar were connected to a powerful organization. It was a big crime syndicate called the Red Thorns, and the escape and built up a large amount of debt, and not just money-wise, but also in opportunities, and how he owed them a debt of saving his family. And so they would call on those debts and have him do particular jobs. And he had, as the joke is, he had a certain set of skills that made him very particular and very popular with this crime syndicate. During this time, a few years had passed, and Alindra was trained by her father. She would go out on some of the safer missions and stuff, and she was trained a little bit by her father with his particular set of skills. But her mother was also a very talented mage. But she was also, the loss of Illustrium and the journey caused her to have very mental and physical illnesses. And so she was very ill, but she would also teach Alindra during certain times how to use arcane abilities and magic. And so she is actually why she's a thief wizard, is because her background allows her to have that. The only rule that I'm changing a little bit is that I'm allowing her to wear thief-based armor and still cast spells without any penalty. So when her father went on a particular mission, it was a setup, and he was killed. This is right after her mother had passed away from the illnesses she had suffered, and she had been suffering for many years. Um, but during this time, Elindra's father had been setting up some escape plan, working to get her out of the city and her mother. And Elindra was aware of it. And when she heard that her father had been mysteriously killed on a mission, she decided it was time to get out of town. She left town and she went north, and she went up north in this area up here. There's a small town called Uruk, and she stayed up there. She used some of her disguising abilities and some of her, but to lay low and just do some odd jobs to survive. Eventually, she met the other two party members through travel and through being around that area up in the north, and they became fast friends, and they've now traveled and done some traveling together in the past couple of years. And that's her story. The next story is Thorum Rungard. This is the miniature I'll be using for him, if you can see it. I like this miniature. It's got a nice red cape. Looks pretty cool. Thorum is a cleric of Doru, which is the god of protection and home. His story is that Thorum's family originally hailed from a dwarven city called Storm Peak, far to the northwest. During the Plague Wars, as the fight and the conflagration that was happening up north was called, Storm Peak came under siege from Dogor's forces. The siege lasted 2 years, and during that time, many dwarven families escaped through hidden routes known only to the inhabitants of Storm Peak. Thorum, his brother Drogrim, and his mother escaped, while his older brother and father remained behind with the defenders of Storm Peak. This defense was only a stalling tactic, as Dogor's forces were too powerful, and they overwhelmed the defenders, and all of them, as far as they know, were killed to a dwarf. Thorum and his remaining family eventually made it south to the region of Capessia, right here. They settled in a small town called Westlock, just right north of Capessia. Since there was a decent-sized temple to Doru, and his mother was a practitioner of that belief system, Thorum decided to practice. Since they were rescued and he felt it was his duty, he joined up and he became a cleric of Doru. He spent several years training as a cleric in that temple, and when his training was completed, he decided to travel around the region to help the beleaguered inhabitants of the region recover from the plague wars. His brother Drogrim joined the military and still serves today as a commander of one of the outposts on the border of the ravaging line, and it goes way up, and we'll see maps of that later, eventually. Thorum's mother still resides in Westlock and is actively serving the temple of Doru located there. On one of Thorum's journeys, he was traveling through Uruk and came across a young, spunky human named Jaren, and they became fast friends. They spent several months and years traveling the region and helping the inhabitants of the region restore some semblance of normality after the plague wars, and that's where they also met Elindra, and they did some journeying around. So they're not well known, but they know the region very well in that northern area right up here, and especially in this area up here. And then finally, the third member of the group is named Jaren Korvak, and this is the miniature I'm using. I really like the model. Jaren was born several years after the conclusion of the plague wars, but his life was greatly influenced by those plague wars. The destruction of the northern lands brought all forms of humanoid survivors into the region. Some of the survivors settled peacefully into the region, while other survivors considered it a chance to claim new territory and proceeded to raid and pillage towns and farmsteads in the region. One of those farmsteads was Jaren's home, and at the age of 12, his family was slaughtered by an attack by orc raiders led by the infamous orc warlord Drox Banetreader. Jaren narrowly escaped the attack and swore on that day that he would protect those unable to defend themselves against the raiders in the area. He spent several years learning fieldcraft and wilderness survival skills while learning to ambush raider outposts. His actions earned the attention of the Waywalkers, an informal group of rangers and druids set on the protecting of the local region. One of the leaders of the Waywalkers, Bjorn the Maw Ranlur approached Jaren and offered him a trial position in the Waywalkers. Jaren accepted with one caveat, that his joining the Waywalkers did not affect his sworn duties to hunt down raiders in the area. Bjorn accepted that caveat, and now Jaren is now an aspirant in the Waywalkers. During this time, as I've said, he meets up with Thorum, and they spend several years traveling together, and then eventually they meet up with Elindra, and they have now become a pretty good team. They work together very well. Their abilities complement each other very well, and they usually are working from the town of Uruk, and that's where their home base is most of the time. They've met some good friends, and they have some individuals there that help support them when they need it. But they do travel the region. So that's pretty much the start of that. I will just wanted to have a quick intro of the world. I will get set up and do another video, and that'll be the first adventure, and you'll see how it runs. We'll do this now. Just enjoy it. I mean, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of role playing, and it'll be me coming up with some situations and stuff, and playing the game as needed. And this will be just telling the story of our adventures and seeing how it takes them, and maybe leading us to bigger and better things, and we'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoy this. Take care.